This debate falls at just the right time, a time when increasing sexual violence and conflict strikes us all, making our action together more urgent than ever. Mr. President, throughout time and regardless of the victims, violence is always condemnable, to be condemned. However, sexual violence and conflict is even more so. Unfortunately, this violence continues. It has become systematic, widespread, and of shocking brutality. Neither women nor girls, nor men, nor boys, nor old people, even babies, none are spared. We heartily condemn these practices of another time that continue today. Our debate today is a very strong and eloquent illustration of this fact. Mr. President, sexual violence doesn't just affect the victims. It infects and eats away at communities and societies as a whole. It aims to wound the body, mutilate dignity, destroy the social fabric, destabilize, ruin, and terrorize societies affected by conflicts, and kill, at inception, any effort at reconciliation and reconstruction. Next June, we will be celebrating the 10th anniversary of the adoption of the Security Council Resolution 1820, which underscores, amongst other things, and I quote, that rape and other forms of sexual violence can be a war crime, a crime against humanity, or an element of the crime of genocide. End of quote. Given the persistence of these heinous acts, indignation is not enough. We must move on to action and propose real solutions in order to help survivors to rebuild. Effective measures that are geared to preventing and repressing acts of sexual violence can greatly contribute to international peacekeeping and security. And in this regard, allow me to underscore the following remarks. First, it's important to attack the deep-seated causes of sexual violence that are related to conflict by promoting peace building and sustainable and human development, and encouraging national initiatives in order to put an end to gender-based discrimination. Secondly, it's important to bolster justice for the victims and fight impunity by bringing perpetrators of sexual violence to justice. Third, it's important to facilitate women's participation in debates and on discussions of prevention and settlement of disputes, peacekeeping, security, and peace building after conflicts, and to support empowerment of women and full and equal participation of women in decision-making. Fourthly, religious leaders have an influential role to play in fighting the abuse of religion in order to justify violence. They should be encouraged to speak out firmly and quickly against violence. Fifth, cooperation with local actors and leaders in communities is vital because they can identify precursor signs of violence, sexual violence, and provide early warning alert systems, strategies, and prevention and protection as appropriate. 6, stigmatization of victims of sexual violence and the children born of sexual violence should be corrected. These victims must be accompanied, provided medical support, and reinserted socially and economically. And I take this opportunity to pay tribute to the Secretary General of the United Nations as the crafter of the United Nations strategy on prevention of sexual exploitation and attacks, and that prioritizes rights and dignity of victims and implements a zero-tolerance policy. The Kingdom of Morocco fully supports this policy of zero tolerance and will work tirelessly, taking all measures as necessary to fully eradicate these heinous acts. We are confident that the strategy will change the given. My country is a member of the Group of Friends of Women with Peace and Security presided over by Canada, a group of friends which includes parity of sex conducted by Colombia, and which adopted a declaration of our commitment to put an end to such acts. Mr. President, protection, prevention, and fighting impunity must be the key words and the emblems of our society. International law, and especially international humanitarian law, should be applied fully and continuously. It is up to us to prevent sexual violence, to protect individuals, and to respond to the needs of the victims, and to guarantee that the perpetrators of these violations be fully held accountable for their acts. It is high time to invest in peace, to favor human and sustainable development, to give back dignity to the victims, and to make a project of reconstruction of society so that peace can become a long-lasting reality. That is our commitment, and was our commitment in adopting the 2030 Agenda. That is our responsibility. That is our duty. Thank you. Thank the representative of Morocco for that statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Mali. Thank you, sir. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, members of the Council, it is my honor and great privilege to take the floor on behalf of the states members of the Human Security Network. This is an intercontinental network which includes Austria, Chile, Costa Rica, Greece, Ireland, Jordan, Norway, Panama, Slovenia, Switzerland, Thailand, South Africa as an observer state, and of course my own country, Mali. The Human Security Network is an informal group of states that works to promote and integrate the security dimension into policies and programs implemented at the national, regional, and international levels. On behalf, then, of the member states of the network, I would like to warmly congratulate the Peruvian President of the Council for organizing this public debate on prevention of sexual violence during conflict through capacity building, gender equality, and access to justice. I would also like to thank the various speakers who have addressed this issue. The Human Security Network commends the Secretary General's most recent report and notes with increasing concern the ongoing use of sexual violence as a war strategy, as well as terrorism, torture, and repression. As indicated in the report, we're very much concerned by the use of sexual violence that continues to be targeted in 2017, targeting people based on their ethnic, religious, or political group or their clan. It is more than ever necessary for the United Nations to work closely with governments with the view to preventing these crimes and encouraging investigations to shed light on the crimes and to provide specialized services to the victims, their families, and to the witnesses. We must not lose sight of the fact that often sexual violence continues even after the end of the conflict. It is a factor which exacerbates insecurity in regions that are affected, and victims of both genders are often deprived of protection and access to justice. And the effects of sexual violence can be felt over several generations. Worse, these crimes are often provided with amnesty. Sexual violence in a post-conflict situation or conflict situation are considered taboo. The victims are generally punished and stigmatized right when the perpetrators go free. Human Security Network therefore joins all appeals and invites the Security Council and member states to redouble their efforts, especially in fighting impunity. We must recognize the key role of international criminal justice, especially the International Criminal Court, for ruling on cases of sexual violence in situations of conflict. Should underscore here that the Rome Statute, and this is great progress, has recognized sexual violence as a war crime and a crime against humanity. In this regard, we commend the ruling handed down in 2017 by the ICC in the Ntaganda case, thereby confirming that such crimes do come under the jurisdiction of the court, and that rape, sexual slavery of children by members of an armed group can be prosecuted as war crimes under the Rome Statutes. However, we once again would like to recall here that the main responsibility for prosecuting the perpetrators of these crimes and to protect victims is to be shouldered by states. Mr. President, sexual violence is recognized as a pillar of security challenges before us. At a time when women and girls are often the first targets, men and boys are often strategically targeted. While it is key that we maintain our momentum in fighting sexual violence, we should also underscore the importance of capacity building for women as part of the solution. Capacity building for women and their participation, increased participation in decision-making bodies, is the cornerstone of any response in the area of prevention and protection. Full enjoyment of human rights is a priority of the Human Security Network and has been since its inception. Protection and promotion of rights are a shared responsibility and can lead to, with firm action and engagement of the United Nations and member states and other actors, to positive results. The Human Security Network would also underscore the importance of emphasizing prevention of future violations and rehabilitating and reintegrating those affected by these heinous crimes through provision of medical and psychological care as appropriate. In this regard, we call upon the Advocate of the United Nations for the Rights of First Victims, Madame Jeanne Connors, to intercede. The network also expresses strong support for the zero tolerance of sexual abuse and exploitation, and thereby a zero impunity approach for all civilian, military, and police of the United Nations, other international organizations involved in peacekeeping, in keeping with the pleadings of the Secretary General. Finally, sir, we would call upon the Security Council and member states to take into account the recommendations of the Secretary General in their efforts to prevent and combat sexual violence in conflict. Thank you, sir. I thank the representative of Mali for that statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Maldives.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wish to thank the government of Peru in its capacity as the President of the Security Council for the month of April for convening this important open debate. 10 years ago, the Council adopted Resolution 1820 that recognized that sexual violence is being used as a tactic of war and therefore can be included in the category of war crimes. This open debate provides an opportunity to reflect on the progress made and evaluate the way forward in implementing the Council's resolution that aim at preventing sexual violence in armed conflicts and post-conflict situations. The Maldives strongly condemns how sexual violence is being weaponized through targeting victims based on ethnic, religious, or political affiliation, which destroys social cohesion, leading to forced displacement and deprivation from economic resources. We note with concern that the failure to address these issues has led to desperate recourse of more harmful magnitudes, including child marriage, withdrawal from educational employment opportunities, and resorting to commercial sexual exploitations. We are pleased to note that progress has been made in a number of countries. We must ensure that this progress is based on evidence about the reality of the situation on the ground. Ensuring that all cases of sexual violence are reported is crucial in strengthening justice mechanisms and accountability. Unfortunately, the majority of these cases remain unreported due to social stigma often attached to victims of the crime for reprisals or the systemic barriers and obstacles that the victims have to overcome. Increased awareness about the nature of the crime, changes in taboo social perception, and having an efficient and reliable framework to identify sexual exploitation are necessary to establish the first step to end impunity and ensure accountability. We also note that there are commonalities in the recommendations for those countries, including strengthening the legal framework, provision of access to justice, as well as socio-economic support for victims, strict screening and training of armed and security forces, and strengthening the framework to enhance cooperation with the United Nations to ensure prevention and response measures. Most of the victims are women and girls from marginalized rural communities who do not always benefit from full legal protection and often have a cultural taboo regarding sexual violence. Therefore, not only should member states strive to extend the reach of the rule of law to all communities, but also ensure that the law itself provides protection to the victims through alignment with international human rights standards on sexual violence and abuse. We believe that greater representation of women in governance, especially those from rural communities, would raise the profile of these issues and facilitate positive change. In addition to this, we also support community mobilization campaigns through community and religious leaders aimed at shifting the stigma of sexual violence from victims to perpetrators. Mr. President, we wish to underscore the responsibilities that armed forces and peacekeeping operations have in preventing sexual violence in conflict. It is important to note to ensure that training in international humanitarian and human rights law in specific context of sexual exploitation, but also establish strict monitoring and accountability within these systems to prevent abuse by those actors themselves. In this regard, we are pleased to note that the UN peacekeeping operations with mandates on protection of civilians have established monitoring arrangements and incorporated early warning indicators of conflict-related sexual violence. The Maldives supports the Secretary General's preventive approach, and we believe that early warning indicators should help prevent sexual violence in conflict prevention areas in addition to post-conflict situations, and that this should be factored in when evaluating risks to peace and security in the Council. In this regard, we wish to emphasize the importance of ensuring adequate funding for sexual violence programs in conflict-affected situations. Mr. President, it is clear that sexual exploitation and abuse is not just a consequence of conflict, but it can also be a weapon that exacerbates conflicts. Addressing the root causes and ending the impunity is the key to ensuring that this heinous crime is brought to an end. We all need to work together to find shared solutions to ensure that all women, men, girls, and boys whose lives are already tarnished with conflict are not permanently scarred with consequences of sexual violence. I thank you, Mr. President.
Le agradezco al representante.
I want to thank the representative of Maldives for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Argentina. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Argentina would like to align itself with a statement made by the distinguished delegation of Canada on behalf of the group of Friends of Women, Peace and Security. And we would like to share with you the following considerations in our national capacity. First of all, we'd like to thank the government of Peru for the initiative of organizing this debate. We'd also like to thank you for being present throughout this debate today. We'd also like to thank the statements made by the Deputy Secretary General, the Special Representative of the Secretary General for Sexual Violence and Conflict, and of course the very courageous testimony of Mrs. Razia Sultana on behalf of the working group NGOs, Women, Peace and Security. Mr. President, Argentina continues to strongly support the efforts of the Secretary General and of the Office of the Special Representative on Sexual Violence and Conflict. We would also like to thank the Secretary General for the publication of his most recent reform, and we fully endorse its recommendations focused on preventing, combating, and eliminating all forms of sexual violence in armed conflicts, with a particular stress on issues pertaining to prevention, early warning, contributing factors, and rapid responses in the face of the occurrence of such crimes. Sexual violence and conflict is one of the most horrific and abhorrent violations of human dignity, and it is an undeniable and unique threat to international peace and security. This is why we must bolster our commitment to prevention, the eradication, and accountability in the face of such crimes. We should put the victims of such crimes at the heart of our action, and we should pool efforts to deal with the structural conditions and underlying conditions that leave these victims in a greater degree of vulnerability and risk. The growing use and threat of sexual violence perpetrated by different actors and armed groups, both state armed groups and non-state armed groups, against specific groups, whether it be women, girls and boys, minorities, persons who have or who are perceived as having a different sexual orientation or a different gender identity, different from the norm inter alia. Such crimes are international crimes of the highest gravity and should be prevented and punished in the framework of the law, making use of the instruments and mechanisms available, including the sanctions regime of this Council. Mr. President, prevention and combating sexual violence and conflict must be at the forefront of all efforts at prevention, peace building, and sustaining peace by the organization and by the international community as a whole. With this in mind, one of the key actions to prevent this scourge is to deal with the risk factors and the underlying conditions that create a situation where women and certain groups find themselves in greater vulnerability and a greater risk in the face of sexual violence. Such factors include, inter alia, structural discrimination, gender-based violence, and a climate of impunity and insecurity. Just as important are actions and efforts aimed at promoting gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls in all their diversity. Now, regarding access to justice and accountability for the crimes of sexual violence, it is essential to improve the capacity to document and research and foster greater cooperation and exchange of information and good practices in the areas of research, documentation, locating and assisting victims, extradition, and legal assistance. All this in order to put an end to the climate of impunity that contributes to the proliferation of these crimes. Now, furthermore, we'd like to reiterate that it is the victims who should be at the heart of all our efforts aimed at prevention and eradication and accountability for the crimes of sexual violence. For this reason, it is essential to protect, shelter, assist, and reintegrate all victims of such violence. This should be done in cooperation with women's organizations and other civil society organizations through the provision of services of assistance and multisectoral support and multidisciplinary support based on a gender perspective, and also measures that include reparation. We should specifically try to satisfy the needs and protect the dignity of the human rights of the victims. Mr. President, these elements should be borne in mind in drawing up the mandates for peacekeeping missions and special political missions, as well as in the peace-building efforts of this Council in the framework of Resolution 1325 and related instruments, incorporating women not only on an equal footing, but also putting them in meaningful positions of decision-making and in making sure that they participate in all processes of negotiation. We should ensure the inclusion of experts on gender issues, on gender-based violence and sexual violence in the various missions set up by this body and in mediation teams, as well as the inclusion of provisions and specific commitments in the areas of peace agreements, cessation of hostilities agreements, and a greater presence in the armed forces and military and police contingents. We're convinced that the development of national plans for the implementation of Resolution 1325 should be seen as an instrument to build peace and prevent sexual violence in all areas, and particularly in situation of conflicts. Guided by this spirit, our country has decided to join the network of national focal points on women, peace, and security. Also, we've decided this year to join the group of Friends of Women, Peace, and Security in Geneva, as well as join the ELSI initiative promoted by the Government of Canada to ensure an increase of women deployed in peacekeeping operations. Mr. President, the prevention of sexual violence and conflict should begin by building societies that are more peaceful. These can be built only on the basis of equality. In accordance with the Agenda 2030, we cannot leave anyone behind. There's no peace without inclusion, and there is no peace without justice. Societies where there's impunity only perpetuate violence. Argentina has a holistic view of peace where fairness and gender equality are state policies that are like a thread runs through all public policies that we implement. We work for the social transformation aimed at making sure that gender equality is effective, and this is an essential condition for strengthening democracy. Hence, the priority gender policies, the elimination of violence against women. In this context, we have implemented reforms in the defense and security sector on issues of gender. In this framework, Argentina would like to reiterate its commitment to a zero-tolerance policy in this organization regarding cases of sexual exploitation and abuse, as well as our support for the measures adopted by the Secretary General on this matter. With this in mind, together with more than 80 countries, we have joined the Voluntary Compact for the Prevention and Combat Against Sexual Exploitation and Abuse. To conclude, Mr. President, we would like to remind you that on the 19th of June, we will observe the International Day for the Elimination of Sexual Violence and Conflict, which was set up by Resolution 69/263 of the General Assembly. And bearing this in mind, we urge all member states, various UN agencies, and other international and regional organizations, as well as civil society and other relevant actors, to participate in the various activities of commemorating this International Day. Thank you very much.
Do we have
I'd like to thank you. There are no further speakers on the list. The meeting is adjourned.